in 2006, I was diagnosed with PTSD. You may think that because you've had to work very hard at becoming a police officer, you're not special. You're a human being. You're going to struggle. You're going to need help. You're going to feel gut-wrenching emotion and not know what to do with it.
G'day, and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. This week on Wellbeing, we have a range of episodes with police officers that have journeyed with PTSD. In today's episode, we speak with retired Canadian police officer Laura Kloosterman. Laura joined the police force at 18 years of age in 1989 and has over the course of her policing career worked in the areas of the drug unit, witness protection, missing persons, and many more. She has also over the course of this time developed PTSD, resulting from her experiences on the job. Now, Laura is the Executive Director of Badge of Life Canada, a charity for first responders journeying with PTSD. Hello, Laura, and welcome to Wellbeing.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Before we begin, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Laura?
I am a 33-year member of the Ontario Provincial Police. So that is our provincial police service here in Ontario, Canada. I have been stationed throughout Ontario and have had various roles while being a police officer. I am newly retired. I have only been retired for a week because I have taken over the role of Executive Director for Badge of Life Canada. And Badge of Life Canada is a peer support program organization that helps educate, transform the culture regarding post-traumatic stress disorder and Canadian public safety personnel.
How did you first come to be involved with the police force?
It's something that I wanted to do my entire life. I literally, from my earliest recollection, is I wanted to be a police officer. My father was a firefighter, and I always wanted to be a police officer, so that's literally what I did right out of high school. I was one of the youngest females ever hired with the Ontario Provincial Police. I was hired at 18, and that literally has been my first and only full-time job. So it was an absolute dream to get on so young. Looking back, I'm not sure whether it was a good thing because I was, so young in a very, a role with huge responsibility. However, looking back after 33 years, it was one of the best careers that I've ever had. It was all wrapped into one. It was exciting. It was sometimes overwhelming, sometimes very sad. All in all, it was literally one of the most rewarding things I could have ever done.
What types of police work did you kind of do during your career?
So I was on the road, so for the frontline policing for probably about 20 years. Then I went into specialized units. So I've been in surveillance, I've been in the drug unit, I've been in witness protection, which deals with, agents and confidential informants when people decide to, they've been in organized crime and then they want to patch over into kind of helping us with the crime. I've been in missing persons and unidentified bodies, dignitary protection, so that was a totally different role. I was doing security for the Lieutenant Governor and for the Premier of Ontario, so that was a very dignified role. And then I've just done different projects here and there. I've worked undercover for a little bit. Other than helicopter and canine, I can honestly say, and the tactical response team, there isn't a whole lot within the organization that at one point I wasn't involved in.
What has been your experience with post-traumatic stress with the job?
Well, I think that when you finish your career and you haven't been touched with post-traumatic stress at some point, I really don't think you can say that, because I think that it's one of these careers where you're going into a career that you're going to see people at their worst, you're going to see traumatic incidents, you're going to be involved in traumatic incidents. And I think that it's one of these where if you recognize that and acknowledge that and do everything proactively to try and circumvent the trauma part of it, I think that kind of it helps. Because you can't go through, you as a police officer, you see things and do things that regular people don't do and don't see. I mean, there are people that have been affected by reading a book that has to do with trauma or watching a movie or a TV show that has to do with trauma. Police officers see it in real life. We're there. We're the ones that are, holding the hands of someone dying. We're the ones that we're in it with these people, and we're side by side with the trauma. And that's huge when you stop to think about what that can do to your mental well-being.
Are there any experiences from your long 33-year career that come to your mind that you still remember today as really confronting and may have led to the PTSD?
Absolutely. One that comes to mind that, right off the forefront was I was involved in a homicide investigation of an 8-year-old girl. She had been kidnapped, she had been sexually assaulted, and then also ultimately murdered. And I had an 8-year-old daughter at the time. And so it was one of I can say that there's lots of things that have affected me throughout my career. That one was one of the biggest investigations I was ever involved in. Provincially, it was one of the biggest investigations that the Ontario Provincial Police were involved in. And it was the one that I think hit home for a huge amount of people because it was a child, because you work so hard. Like initially you work so hard to try and find her, and you think, in your heart of hearts, you're like, we're going to find her. And then as the time goes on, you're like, it's not likely because we know human behavior and we know kind of like what path we're going down. I was on it for a year, and it was a huge investigation. And I think that every officer that was involved in that investigation, if you were to say what's one of the ones that affected you the most, because it was a child, I would say that they would be conclusive with me that it was a big one.
At the time of that experience, how did you mentally deal with it?
I think one of the best way was the fact that it was because it wasn't close to home. So I traveled, I was deployed, it was about 2 hours away from where I lived. So I was working and not going home every night. So I think the fact that I could mentally detach from the fact that I had an 8-year-old daughter at home, that helped for the mental detachment of it. And then it was literally talking to my peers. It was working out. It was trying to get enough sleep. Of course, I tell all police officers when they start, the best thing you can do is to get a therapist. Before you even delve into this career, you need to get a therapist because you need to have someone to talk to, and then they need to get a baseline for how you are and how you deal with things. So, of course, I spoke to my therapist. I had regular, phone visits and things like that, and just tried to stay as mentally healthy as I could, knowing the depths of this investigation.
What was the attitude in the police force when you first joined towards PTSD?
33 years ago, it was, you didn't talk about it. You didn't discuss any struggles. Because I was so young, because my first posting was at a detachment where most of my coworkers were old enough to be my father, if not my grandfather. You didn't dare. You didn't dare cry. You didn't dare show emotion. You didn't dare because it was just, it made you weak. It was the old, saying of suck it up and move on. And I think that looking back on when I dealt with, when I was with my coworkers who were older, they were so negative and so distrusting. And I think that was their coping mechanism. And I look back and I think that's all it was, is they were struggling and they didn't want anybody to see it. So if you put a big brave front up of, nothing affects me and just suck it up and I'm strong and I'm, nothing's going to break this armor, then that's a coping mechanism. And I've seen over the years us kind of transform the culture a little bit through taking away the stigma. However, you know what? It's still there. It is still there. We're still having officers, die by suicide. We're still having people struggle, and we're still having the old dinosaur mentality of just, move on. Just, you're weak. Just kind of suck it up. And I think that as much as we want to say that we are moving forward in, leaps and bounds, we're making very small baby steps, and we still have a long way to go to transform the culture.
What are some ways that we can work on that stigma and that culture?
Talk. I think we start at all levels. I think we start with the new recruits to say, you're not special. You have, you may think that because you've had to work very hard at becoming a police officer, you're not special. You're a human being. You're going to struggle. You're going to need help. You're going to feel gut-wrenching emotion and not know what to do with it. And that's okay. Let's just talk about it, and let's learn positive coping skills. Let's learn to, be open and honest and transparent about what we're feeling, and don't put other people down. Don't, whisper in the corner because someone's, sitting and having a moment that they just need someone to come over to them and say, are you okay? Care about people. Care about your fellow workers. And just keep talking and just say it is okay. And be open and honest. Be open and honest with yourself. Be open and honest with your family. Don't try and at every level of policing, we have to make it that. So recruiting, it's one of these where you're not special, you're going to feel things. Then when you become a coach officer, you train the coach officers to watch what happens with the recruits, because the recruits are going to be thrown into situations that they don't know how to deal with. So a coach needs to be able to say, you know what, let's talk about this, and be open about it. And then supervisor, same thing. So at every level, if we educate police officers to know the signs and be trauma-informed and know about sanctuary trauma and moral injury and, post-traumatic stress disorder and traumatic incidents. If we keep talking, training, educating, we're going to transform the culture. We're absolutely. It's so doable, and I think that that's sometimes what's so frustrating is it's so doable. It's so fixable. We just need to be open and honest with ourselves and each other.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. Today we are speaking with retired Canadian police officer Laura Kloosterman about her journey with PTSD.
Did you find that the PTSD in yourself gradually became, or was it something that was pretty much there from the start?
No, it's gradual. It's absolutely gradual. I mean, it's an accumulation. When I know that I had one therapist, and they were like, well, what was the one thing? And I'm like, there isn't one thing. It's accumulative. It's time and time again when you're seeing, traumatic incidents, when you're being involved in traumatic incidents. And sometimes it's, the smallest thing that triggers, and you're like, okay, I'm not coping with this very well. So it's definitely cumulative over the years, and not dealing with it, not talking about it, not, thinking I'm the only person. I'm the only person that's struggling with this right now. And I know that, like in 2006, I was diagnosed with PTSD, and back in 2006, nobody talked about it. Like, nobody talked about it. And when I went off for 6 months, and I literally remember lying to my supervisor when they said, like, what's wrong? I said, there's some health issues and things like that. Well, I should have said, I'm struggling, like I'm having, some mental issues, but I wanted to make it physical instead of mental because I didn't want to have that stigma. I didn't want to have that black cloud. And I can see it getting better now. And it was one of these, once I dealt with it in 2006, then it was like, okay, let's dive into it and let's find out what's going on. And I think that then, you kind of are able to deal with it, and you're able to, educate yourself and then educate others. And I think that that's very important for officers that have been diagnosed with any kind of operational stress injury to come forward and say, you know what, me too. Like, you know what, that's happened to me. I have that. I'm no different than anybody else. And that helps the others that are struggling to go, oh my gosh, it's not just me. I'm not alone. I'm not alone in my journey. There are other people here that I can depend on and talk to.
How much support is there available for officers that are suffering from PTSD?
Before, there was very, very little. Absolutely, practically none. Now, there are resources out there. There are definitely lots of resources out there. And so it's one of these where if you try a therapist that you don't like, then there's other ones that you can choose from. There's peer support programs. There's group peer support programs. There's one-on-one peer support programs. However, what happens is when the officer's in crisis, they just don't know where to look. And they become so, disheartened that they don't have the energy. They don't feel that they don't have the control that they need to start. And I think that's the hardest part, is to try and tell people, let's find out resources before a crisis happens, because it's like anything else, right? You think, I won't need to, buy water because we're never going to run out of water. Well, then all of a sudden something happens, and I think with the pandemic we definitely can, begin to identify with that, is we need to be prepared. And I think that police services need to prepare their officers, saying, these are the resources we have. This is what's out there should you need help. You may not need it now. However, this is what's out there. And there are organizations, all kinds of organizations out there that will help.
What becomes harder to do in daily life when you do have PTSD?
Everything. Absolutely everything. I mean, everything. Sleeping, being awake, showering, dealing with people, going grocery shopping, thinking of, the next hour, thinking of, like, you don't even, And then all of a sudden, then you ruminate, you catastrophize, and you think that everybody's looking at you. So you go to the grocery store and you think, well, everybody's looking at me because I know that they know that I'm struggling, and anxiety, and it's everything. And then it becomes, it becomes a vortex. It becomes the vicious circle of, I can't do anything. I don't feel like getting up out of bed. I don't feel like just getting on with my day. I don't feel like showering, and then it just kind of like spirals downward and downward. And then you don't reach out for help because you think, I don't want anybody to see me like this. I mean, I remember thinking, I'm the strong one. I'm the strong one in my family. I'm the one that I'm pulled together. I have got all that. I can't let anybody see that I'm like this, that I'm struggling, that I'm not, I'm not okay, and that because I'm special, because I'm a police officer, so I should be stronger than this. Then you don't want to do anything. And I mean, you don't sleep, you don't eat, you just don't feel like doing anything.
Was it hard for you to acknowledge that there was something going on mentally with the PTSD?
Absolutely. I mean, it wasn't even me that kind of like addressed it. It was my husband, and he said, I remember he said, "Can you meet me here at this time?" And I was like, yes. I mean, I didn't want to shower, and I didn't shower, and I just met him, at this parking lot, and I kind of had a feeling as to where we were going. Well, we went to the doctor, and I had a wonderful family doctor who was very progressive, and she said, you have post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was like, in 2006, I was like, what? And then she said, okay, let's deal with this together. Let's get into this together. And we tried medication, and it didn't work. And then it was literally, we just worked together to come up with stuff. I changed therapists a couple times and got a trauma-informed therapist that was used to dealing with first responders. And I remember her saying to me, just try this, go for a walk. I want a half an hour of going for a walk. And I remember thinking, well, this is the silliest thing I've ever heard. Like, go what? And then it started. Then it started the working out, started feeling better. Then all of a sudden you get more energy, and then you feel like, okay, and then you talk through stuff. And then all of a sudden you meet people, and you go, oh, my gosh, you're dealing with the same things. And then because peer support is absolutely vital in a journey, because you're not alone. Because all of a sudden you have someone that you can call up and say, I'm having a hard time right now. And someone on the other side of the phone just holds space. Just hold space while whether it's you cry, you yell, you laugh inappropriately, or you have someone holding space. And it's a journey. And I tell people now, it is a marathon. It is not a sprint. It is a marathon.
How did it feel for you when you first started opening up and talking about all these experiences?
Empowering. It absolutely felt empowering, because all of a sudden you go places, you talk to other people, you talk to other officers, and because they, I guess a little bit to my detriment as well, because they looked at me as someone that was feisty and strong and outspoken and ambitious. When I opened up and said, yeah, you know what? It's happened to me. I've been diagnosed with PTSD. I've struggled through it. This is what's going on. It almost gave the acceptance of, it's okay. Okay, well, you know what? This could happen to me too, or this is what I'm dealing with, or this is what I'm struggling with, and it gave license to people to open up about their own struggles, and it was hugely empowering. And I went on to do just that in every part. Like the last job that I retired from was in professional standards, and it was called Proactive Programs, and it was a program that I created for officers that found themselves in a complaint with an independent body through from Ontario. And there were some of them were very small complaints. However, there was something going on with the officer. So when I spoke to the officer, I said, "Listen, like this sounds like when you yelled at that person that there was something else going on. It just wasn't the interaction with the member of the public. Something else is going on." Well, then all of a sudden they open up. And they're like, yeah, I've had a really bad day. I've had a really bad week. I've had a really bad month. I'm, struggling with sleeping. I'm struggling with, just getting up and coming to work in the morning. And then once you share, and I mean, I always say you share to identify. You don't share to compare. And officers are really good with, like, the trauma talk and the war porn and, well, yeah, you ain't seen nothing, look at this. And once you share to identify, officers will open up to that. No matter what, officers will open up to that. It may take a little while, but they open up to it, and they know that it's okay to put their hand up and say, you know what, I need some help.
You're listening to Wellbeing, a nationally distributed radio show and podcast. Today we are speaking with retired Canadian police officer Laura Kloosterman about her journey with PTSD.
Is the PTSD ever really cured, or is it something that needs to be managed ongoing?
Managed ongoing. You're never without it. It's always there, and you just have to acknowledge it. So sometimes I'll be, there are certain things that will trigger. So, you understand going, like, there'll be, you'll see something, you'll smell something, and it takes you back to a memory. So you just kind of you use the coping skills, and you say, okay, let's just stop and breathe. Let's remain in the present. And you just learn all of the skills, and you use all the skills that you learned, because it's never gone. I mean, and it's, makes you, some people are within their journey, they say, I just want to be like I was before. And I always say, I like the way I am right now because I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned a lot about how I react to things. I learned a lot of whys. Why I do what I do, why some people do what they do, and you're never without it. So it's just like a friend that you just kind of take around and go, you know what, we're gonna deal with this today. And some days are better than others, and sometimes you just think, you know what, I gotta sit in it, and I have to read a book and show some self-compassion because today's not going to be a good day. And then you just get up the next day and you're like, okay, you know what, now's a new day.
What are the ways that a family member can help someone that has PTSD?
I think the biggest thing is to learn as much as you can about it, to remain non-judgmental, to be understanding and hold space, show compassion and empathy. And also, sometimes it just comes down to the abruptness of, you need to get help. Make sure that the officer knows that they are not going to go through this journey, or they are not going to run this marathon by themselves. And I think that's a big one, and I think it's a family involvement. I think that lots of times we have left the family out of things, and I think we need to involve the family more. I think that by having them involved in the journey, then it allows them to take some control back, because they're a very important piece, and it is. They need to be a part of the journey through the good times and the bad, just like anything else.
To some of the officers that may be listening to this program when it goes on air and haven't quite gotten help yet, what would your advice be to them?
To sit down. I mean, journaling is one of the most powerful things because you put things down on paper that you wouldn't necessarily say out loud. To really do some self-reflection and say, what's going on? And why am I so reserved to getting help? Or why am I so reserved about talking about this? And where am I going to be in the next couple years? Where am I going to be in the next couple days? Because I ask officers, are you enduring or are you enjoying? Because it can't be, work is work and home is home. They're interconnected. And if you think that you are leaving work at work when you come home, you are absolutely positively fooling yourself. Because we have one brain. So it's all part and parcel, and it's all connected. And the actions that the officer that is struggling has, it's like a ripple in the water. It has the ripple effect of taking everyone and affecting everyone with it. And, I know I've talked to, my kids were young, so they don't really remember a whole lot, but I know I've spoken to some officers, and they've said, my kids won't talk to me. Because I'm such a jerk, my kids won't talk to me. Well, that didn't just happen. And I got an idea, go ask your kids why. And they're going to tell you the truth, because kids will tell you that they're brutally honest. They'll tell you the truth. And instead of being defensive about it, go with an open mind, go with an open heart, just drop the defenses for a little bit, because we're, tough guys and tough gals, they literally finish last, and they're very, very alone. And that's kind of like what you don't want to struggle by yourself, and there's no need to struggle by yourself. There are organizations out there. There are all kinds of people that are more than willing to walk with you in that journey.
Well, it was great having you on the show today, Laura.
Thank you very much. It was amazing.
My guest today was retired Canadian police officer and Executive Director of Badge of Life Canada, Laura Kloosterman. Tune in for our next episode where we talk with 2 police officers from Victoria, Australia, about their journeys with PTSD. And if you like this content, check out the rest of our series on PTSD. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.